Okay, so let me introduce our speaker, Professor Antonio Paez. He's a professor of the School of Earth, Environment, and Society at McMaster University. He specializes in spatial data analysis, discrete choice modeling, transportation systems, accessibility, and urban and health geography, which is particularly relevant to CUSP. So he's an author on more than 130 peer-reviewed articles in international academic journals. And we're very honored to have him here. And he has recently released a book called Discrete Choice Analysis with R, which sounds very practical. So yes, and then also we have in the links here at the very top of the chat, a link to the live slides. So people are welcome to also click on that link if they want to see the slides, follow along with the slides. And so I will hand it off to Dr. Paez. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jackie, and Lampos and Mauricio at CUSP for the invitation to give this seminar. We exchanged some emails thinking what would be interesting for this presentation, and finally decided that active school travel and framing might be of interest. So it does combine a few things that are relevant. So it's transportation, active transportation, children, health, and one thing that I have been interested in for some time is framing. Let me just say that the leading author is Elise Desjardins, who is a PhD student here at McMaster. She's currently on maternity leave, but she led this effort with a big assist from Jason Lam, who was an undergraduate research assistant working with us, and then our colleagues and collaborators in the University of Alberta and the Polytechnique in Montreal. The link to the slides, as Jackie said, is in the chat if you would like to follow that link, or you can use your mobile device or your tablet, go to the website here at the top, and the code, because these slides will be interactive. So I see that already there is a reaction, a thumbs up, and then there is a comment. Okay, so a question already, and I think that we will get to that in a moment. So let me just make space here, and this is still in presentation mode, I believe. Let me go on to the next slide. So here is an interactive slide for you. So that's why the code and accessing the live slides is useful. And if you're following on the slides, you will see that there is a chance to enter some text. But my question to you is fairly general. What is a frame? Just very general. So I'm going to give you a moment to okay, so we begin to see some answers. Okay, so I'll give you a moment to.
I am very bad with this. It will take me a while. I'll just be patient.
Yes, it's okay. Okay, I'm also trying to find how to make this full page. Full screen. So button. I'm going to choose this one. No. Button. Not sure about that. Okay, back to the slides, and so let's take a look at the answers. And that's probably a little bit better. So I'm going to display the results. What are the answers? Okay, so what is a frame? So we'll have the answers to that. What a frame is a concept that comes from communication studies that says that it's a central idea or storyline that provides meaning to a particular phenomenon. In a way, a frame is a little bit of a cognitive shortcut. So to allow us to think with the least effort about things, it's useful to have some guiding ideas that help us create meaning out of that. And that is important because it helps us perceive, identify, label, locate information from a bunch of different dimensions of an issue. So if you responded to the framing question, what is a frame? So a frame is, a physical frame allows you to see parts of something. That something is going to be much bigger. The frame allows you to focus or concentrate on some aspects of it. So it's the same idea, but the framing here is a cognitive device for understanding something without being overwhelmed, potentially by the vastness or the complexity of the thing that we are observing. So I'll give you some examples about how framing is usually done. And I think that this is done naturally, and sometimes naturally with assumptions that are not necessarily explicit. Okay, so this is a screenshot from a news item on the New York Post, and it's reporting on a collision, a traffic event or a road event, and it says a pedestrian was killed, struck by a car. Notice that it is an NYPD car, so it's a police car. Pedestrian was struck by a car. The car crashed, it crashed. The cop car then struck a parked vehicle and so on and so forth. Okay, so who is telling us this? Well, according to law enforcement, this is what happened. A police car hit a person, the police car crashed, the police car did this, the police car did that. Okay. Unfortunately, the pedestrian who was hit died from this. Now let's take a look at a second news item. Also in the vicinity of New York, and again a collision or a road event where 3 people were killed. The driver lost control. Who is telling us the story? Again, it's the police forces, right? So the driver lost control according to cops. So what is the difference between these two very similar stories? There is a collision on the road. Some people die, but they're told in a slightly different way. What is the difference? if you wish to unmute yourself to comment. But I'm curious to see if you or how easily you perceive the difference in how the stories are told. Okay, so in one note, a police car hit someone, and that someone died. In the second one, a driver lost control, and people died. So what's in your opinion the key difference in how these two things are told? Okay, so we see a comment at the bottom. In one, the driver is an active person. Yes. One, the driver is an active person, and then in the other, it is this entity, a car, which is given that agency. It was not a cop driving, it was not a police person driving the car. It was a car that did all these things and ended up in this unfortunate situation of killing a woman. But when it was not a police car, it was a driver. The driver had agency, right? So the highlights in the two notes is who's telling the story. When law enforcement says a civilian was involved in this, they say the civilian had agency. But when the same kind of organization tells us that something happened involving a vehicle from NYPD, they don't give agency to the police person who was driving that. It was a car that did this, right? So this is an example of how framing can be very, very subtle in the way we tell stories, because it has to do with who has agency, who is in power. What can we do about it? I mean, we cannot go and tell the car, please don't do that. The car is inanimate. And yet somehow, for the purposes of hitting a woman, it's giving that agency, right? So we cannot say to the police person because it's presented as if it was a car. Whereas in the other case, yes, we can say to the civilian, you did not drive, you were, careless or whatever, because the agency is given to a person, right?
So, Antonio,
yes.
what are the sources? There was one was New York Post. Can I see again?
Yes. So one was the New York Post, and the second one was also from the New York Post.
Both of them New York Post. Okay.
Exactly. So both of them are the New York Post, because if it had been two different newspapers, if it had been the New York Post, and then the next one is the Washington Post or the Times or something else, and you say, well, maybe they have different styles of reporting. But here, what this makes me think is that whoever reports on this, they must have editorial guidelines on how to write and how to present things and so on and so forth. And most likely what they're doing is either, unconsciously or consciously, granting power to law enforcement by saying they're not responsible, their cars are, and disempowering, or rather empowering in a different way, civilians, right? Or it could be that they just report what law enforcement say. Law enforcement say, one of our cars hit someone, and in another case, law enforcement say, person X lost control and people died, right? So that is why the other highlight. So in the two slides, it's struck by the car, it crashed, the cop car. It's never a person, it's always a car, whereas in this case, it is the driver, right? So that's what's giving responsibility and agency. But who is telling the story as well is very important. So law enforcement sources say, right? So who is telling the story to understand why this may be framed in a certain way. Okay, the way the story is told matters, is what I'm trying to say. It matters because it's a very subtle, like I said, but also a very powerful way to influence, how we perceive phenomena. Our attitudes, our perceptions are shaped by how the story is told. And in that previous example, it was the story tells us of a car that was out of control. The story tells us of a person who was out of control. But it was not the same. One person was a civilian, the other person was in a position of authority and power, right? Why does that happen? They may not even realize that they're doing that, but in essence, that's what they're doing. Yes. So what can we do? Or you cannot ask the police to not do that because it was not a person, it was a car. Whereas you can ask civilians to do something. One more example before moving on to the actual research, but I think that this is, it's important to understand why framing matters. Yes. So there is this, again, a report on distracted pedestrians and deadly accident. And it begins by, telling us that there is a problem. Pedestrian deaths have risen steadily. Okay, that tells us that there is a problem. So there is a study that went and did some analysis, and it shows how prevalent distracted walking is and its deadly effects. Distracted pedestrians are a problem, right? But this is talking about collisions with cars, right? And now it's probably a lot easier to see that the problem are the pedestrians because they are looking at cell phones. That is a problem for motorists. Who is telling us the story? Well, not surprisingly, a car insurance organization, right? It's for someone who is shopping for car insurance. You are not the problem. We're not going to tell you that you're the problem and that you should drive carefully. You are not. The problem are those distracted pedestrians, right? So again, whether this was done, consciously or unconsciously, is, difficult to say, but the effect is to, frame pedestrian deaths as a problem as the fault of distracted pedestrians, not drivers, not excessive traffic, not excessive reliance on automobility, not lack of pedestrian infrastructure. The drivers are distracted. That is a problem. So thinking about framing and how it helps to shape those perceptions and as a consequence, influences what do we think is a problem? What can be done about a problem? Our question was about active travel in the province of Ontario. We wanted to know how was that presented to the public, and we asked that by looking at the different sort of stakeholders. So there will be school boards. The school boards are or should have some interest in transportation. How do kids get to school? But also transportation agencies or consortia. So in the Greater Toronto and Hamilton area, there is a metropolitan, it's a multi-municipality region, but there is a metropolitan planning agency, right? So Metrolinx doesn't have, Metrolinx is the name of this organization. Metrolinx doesn't have, in fact, have a group of people who look at active school travel, right? So they have an interest in this. The municipalities have an interest in this. The school boards have an interest in this. Other, stakeholders like home and school associations or parents' councils have a stake on this, right? So we went to look at how they communicate about active school travel by searching their documents, their websites, and so on and so forth, to extract all the materials that we could find where, travel to school is discussed, and looking more deeply into to what extent active travel is presented, if it is presented at all. So we divide this, so we collect all that information. It's basically text. So we grab text from PDF files, from websites, HTML, and so on and so forth. We identified 62 school boards in Ontario, and 32 had materials that that discuss transportation and so on in an easily findable way, and in a usable way. So many of these, so you see, it's about half of the school boards that for whom we collected information. We had a rule about how deep we had to go before we found something. Since this is, the idea is how does communication with the public helps the public understand the issues. If we had to follow more than 3 links to get to something, we said, yeah, that's not communicating anything. It's basically, hidden information, right? So we had a rule, and I don't recall if it was more than 2 clicks or more than 3 clicks, but essentially we said, if it's not in the surface, it's not really communicating. Which is why we don't have every single school board. It's possible that many of them or all of them have something, but about half of them don't have something that communicates immediately and that is easy to find. Same for municipalities, same for transportation consortia all across the province. And so all that text is part of a corpora or a corpus of text that we call policy and practice. So it's, school boards, policy practitioners, and municipalities, planning documents, and so on. And then we also did a search and collected information from scholarly journal articles, thinking that it might be interesting to see how do, academic planners and engineers and so on and so forth talk about these issues compared to how it's talked about in policy and practice. So we also have 227 papers that we use for that. All this is described in the paper that we have. There is a preprint, and the paper is currently being reviewed by a journal. I'm going to share the link at the end of the presentation. And also, I would like to point out, I was telling Mauricio just before that, I have been very interested in open science. So this project is kind of as open as we could make it. There is a GitHub repository with all the code, all the text, everything that we use to do the analysis is publicly available if you're interested in reproducible science, especially of qualitative information, so text analysis and that. This is a great example for that. So once that we have this corpora of text, policy and practice, scholarly writings, how do we work with it? So essentially, we took a natural language processing approach. Some of it semi-automated with supervision. So it was not a fully automated analysis, and then expert interpretation. So essentially what we do is we take all that text, create a text matrix with it, where things are labeled by whether they came from, a school board or a municipality, right? All that information is there. And then we look at things like word frequencies. What sort of words come up, are used more or less? How do they correlate with other words? So n-grams, for instance, is a way of finding words that tend to appear together. So topic modeling is another way of doing natural language processing. And what that does is essentially a clustering algorithm that identifies words that tend to appear in clusters, right? And once that we had all that, that gave us sort of, a way to see what comes to the surface. And then we did the expert interpretation, which was reading those documents, to validate our semi-automated analysis and to find whether that had missed anything that was important or whether we found any contradictions, right? So there was this sort of expert in-depth analysis of the documents that was combined with the semi-automated natural language processing. So some of the results of the analysis. So this is the topic modeling. So what we see in terms of the beta, let me quickly explain what these plots are. So each of these plots is essentially a bar chart that maps the frequency of a term. And each of these charts is a cluster. Okay, so we have cluster 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on and so forth. And each of those clusters has words that appear together with some frequency. Yes. So for instance, we see that cluster 1 on the top left corner of this plot is about safety, public traffic health, network, winter sidewalks, right? So those are all things that terms that tend to cluster together. If we see, for instance, cluster number 8, that is active, physical activity, health, travel, children, right? So having seen that, each of these clusters then is interpreted as dealing mostly with things that relate to health and safety, planning and infrastructure, organization and jurisdiction, and so on and so forth, right? So we ended up with 9 clusters that tell us something about the topics in this, in this corpus of text. And so the topics, if we, after labeling them, so we examine them, we discuss them with the group of researchers, and eventually it's safety, weather, and busing. Very important because that's something that the school boards do. So they need to have a policy on when busing stops in case of inclement weather and so on and so forth. Active travel planning, walking, resources for walking, bicycling, active travel concerns, benefits of active travel, and busing logistics. So these are sort of, the high level topics that emerge from the analysis. Then we go and look at the policy and practice corpus of text and the n-grams. The n-grams are basically correlations between words. Yes. And so we find that there are also these kind of clusters, but one of them, the ellipse on the bottom left. So you can see that it's master plan, action, planning, plans, as possibly in relation to active, sustainable modes for benefits, safe routes. Yes. Greenhouse gas emissions, green, public health, mental health, physical activity, daily physical activity, right? So these n-grams come up from the whole corpus of policy and practice, which then we think, okay, so is this consistent across the different stakeholders? So we're getting this, sort of planning, health, activity, emission, sustainability. Is this something that, is presented or discussed in a uniform way across stakeholders? Remember that we had school boards, municipalities, transportation consortia. So we go and repeat the same thing, but now segmenting by stakeholder. And then we find that for school boards, it's walking, cycling, inclement weather, physical activity, public health, and then a big one on planning for active travel for sustainability reasons and because it's safe, and so safe routes are needed. So not every concept that was in the in the engram for the full corpus is actually showing there. When we look at municipalities, so municipalities are interested in the benefits of active travel, but also greenhouse gases, right? That kind of makes sense when we think that the schools are responsible for busing and for planning travel to school, but that municipalities are should be making commitments or at least giving some lip service to greenhouse gas emissions and so on. Bike lanes, bike racks, and so on, which is providing infrastructure at the level of the city. And something that shows in common is public health, mental health, physical activity, right? When we look at transportation consortia, again, what we see is that, planning for providing transportation services, safety and how to deal with that, crossing guards, and again, planning and developing plans to support active school travel to school or active school travel. So after doing this analysis and then going into the documents and developing sort of our own understanding of the frames, yes, and like I said, the frames don't need to be intentional. They could be, but they don't have to, and yet they can be effective. So this is to say that we are not convinced that the municipalities and the school boards coordinate to have a consistent message. But what emerged from this is that the primary frame to discuss active school travel is from the perspective of health and the environment. So then we go on and in our review of the documents, reading them in depth, not just feeding them to a machine learning algorithm. This is a kind of message that we find. If you live in a walk zone, the best way to get to school is by walking or biking. This promotes physical activity, helps the environment, and minimizes traffic around school during visit times. Right, so it's the best way to do this if you live in a walk zone, right? So it's conditional. If you live in a walk zone, which must be a designated area around schools where walking is considered to be feasible. So if you live there, walking is good. It's the best way because you're active, it helps the environment, it reduces traffic, right? This is from the city of Bari. The region of Leeds, Grenville, and Lanark, active school travel is a great way for children to be physically active again. So there is that physical activity and health. Maurizio.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit of background about these places? I know nothing about them. Like, how do they look?
Yes. So the answer to that is that I don't know how all of them look. And so, for instance, I have a sense of Bari, but not of the region of Leeds, Grenville, and Lanark. So I couldn't tell you physically what they look like, what their demographic outlook is, or profile. So I don't really know them. And so that is something that we sort of infer from this. For instance, in the city of Bari, where they say, if you live in a walk zone.
Yeah, so does it mean that the walk zone is a special place that you are elected to live there, or is a rare thing to be in?
Exactly. So it's and that probably it's also some designated.
Correct.
So it's not only that people think it's possible to walk there, but that it's designated as a walk zone. In the city of Hamilton, for instance, that's the one that I know best, of course. The city of Hamilton has these walk sheds, and they are defined by policy by the school board. So a walk shed is for, say, elementary schools, I believe 750 meters walking distance to the school. So if you are inside of that, that's a walk shed. And I imagine that a walk zone is probably something very similar to that. In Hamilton, again, the walk shed for high school is 1.2 kilometers. So it goes from 750 meters for the elementary school kids to 1.2 kilometers for high school kids. So region of Leeds, Grenville, and Lanark. As you can see, it's great way for children to be physically active. Physical and mental health improve. School zones are safer, right? So now a school zone is not necessarily a walk zone. A school zone is the part of the street network that has reduced speeds. So let's say that the speed on a city street is 60 kilometers per hour. In a school zone, it's reduced to 40, even 30, right? So school zones are safer because there is less traffic and so on. Yeah. So again, health and environment. This is the Waterloo Catholic District School Board, an organization that supports active transportation because it's a healthy choice that also leads to better academic performance or achievement. Yeah? So it's sort of this message of health and environment. The environment is safer. There is less traffic. It's it's convenient as long as you are in some of those zones. And here I guess I can point out to this when analyzing policy. The policy tools are usually direct or classified as direct, indirect, monetary, non-monetary, right? And they all have different levels of effectiveness. And among the least effective policy tools is when you have non-monetary, indirect tools, which basically amount to begging, please do this. But it's just, we really, really would love it if you did this, but there is no policy, there is no penalty, there is no teeth, no incentives. It's just, we beg of you. It's this is what we would like you to do, right? And so you can see here that it's like, yes, it's a great way. The school board supports it. We recommend it. We would like to let you know that it's what we think is most convenient. The secondary frame in that we identify after our analysis is feasibility and practicality of active school travel. And so it talks about some things that can be done to facilitate that behavior. So, for instance, the city of Ottawa, this is a municipality. So a way to make sure your child is safe while walking to school is with a walking school bus. And then they give you tips for implementing that. Have fun, right? And the tips will be something like coordinate with a group of parents in your neighborhood. Organize so that you start walking with a kid, you pick up a second kid and the next house, and then you continue walking, you pick up kids along the way, and then when you approach the school, you already have this walking bus of 15 kids all walking together, right? So they give you hints and suggestions to achieve something like that. Help students get started on the right foot. Encourage them to walk or bike to school when possible. Even leaving the car a block away, even if you drive to school, don't park right in front of the entrance. Park a couple of blocks away and walk the rest. Even that helps. Yes, this is Halton District School Board. Ottawa Carleton District School Board. Would you like your child to be mentally and physically healthy? We have produced a tip sheet for parents about active transportation to school. Okay, so here's information that you could use to do that to boost the health and the mental and physical health of your child. So how effective do you think are these frames? And here is an interactive slide again. So you can choose for different values of that.
And how I do it? Like again.
In the slide, I think that it gives you an option to slide the number.
I am awful with this.
So how effective are these frames? So health and environment, we have one response saying that 2, one response saying that 3. Now we have responses. It's a tiny sample, but just imagine how these frames communicate the issue of active school travel and how effective are they at accomplishing. I mean, everybody says it would be great if more kids walked or cycle, right? So we have something that says not very effective, but not.
Dr. Paez, I think we've lost your video and sound. We can't hear you now.
Environment.
Oh, here you're just back. We lost you for 1 second, but just for a few seconds we lost you, but you're back now.
Okay, so coming back to this, it's of the small sample that we have here, it's not completely ineffective, but it also doesn't seem to be super effective. So I'm going to give you sort of an analog of the frames. So we have health and environment. Okay. I liken that to the primary frame is broccoli is good for you. Okay. So essentially, the primary frame, the way it's communicated is walking is good for you, cycling is good for you, it's good for your health, it improves your mental health, it can help you do better at school, right? Here are some tips about that. But essentially what they're telling you is X is good for you. And that X is like walking takes effort, cycling takes effort. It's a lot easier to just jump in a car and get driven to school. So it's something that, between a Twinkie Wonder and broccoli, I mean, so the primary frame is, hey, we know that you like Twinkie, but broccoli is good for you. Please think about having some broccoli. Whereas the secondary frame is, you can buy it fresh at your local supermarket. Okay, the secondary frame is broccoli is good for you, and we are not going to give you a voucher to buy broccoli. We're not going to send broccoli to your house. We are not going to, make it easier for you to eat broccoli, which we're telling you is healthy. What we're going to tell you is, if you wanted to eat broccoli, which we think is good for you, go and buy it fresh at the local supermarket. Here are the tips for eating more broccoli. Add broccoli to your life. Go to supermarket, buy it fresh. Right? So compare that to a message. Jackie?
Oh yes, I just we have about 10 minutes left, so
yes.
Make sure you know that, just so we save some time for Q&A.
Yes, and these are the last 2 slides. So I think that the timing is not not too far off. I just wanted to add this, where, you know, the framing is broccoli is good for you, buy it fresh. Compare this to eat broccoli or face a horrible climate change-driven collapse of civilization, right? Which obviously is not what we're being told. It's not how active travel to school is framed. It's telling us nothing about obesity, telling us very little about, you know, the implications of automobility for climate change and so on and so forth. So when we come to the conclusions of this analysis, essentially, we think that the framing of AST in Ontario is reasonable. There is nothing objectionable about this, except that it's very anodyne. Like, broccoli is good, buy it fresh. Yeah, there is no sense of urgency. There is no call to action. It's like, we recommend, if you can, please think about it, right? So there is no sense of we must do this. There is a sense of urgency and a call to action. And also we are left with the impression that various organizations are working not necessarily across purposes, but are also not well coordinated. That the message could be coordinated much better to achieve that sense of urgency, to ensure that we can actually motivate people to act, right? So last slide, and I'm just going to leave it up there. So I believe that you can click on the link if you have the slides on your screen, but this is currently a preprint and it is being peer reviewed by Transportation Research Part A. So we hope to have some responses from them soon. But with this, I would like to finish and thank you again for the invitation and for attending the seminar today. And yes, open to questions, suggestions, criticism. Let me know what you think.
Thank you so much. That was so interesting. I love the idea of using natural language processing for trying to kind of uncover some ways that we're framing problems. It's very interesting. So yeah, let's open the floor to questions. I'll just start off because I have a really burning question. So in the beginning, when you showed the example with police, it automatically made me think that this kind of method could be used for instance, looking at unconscious racism within or perhaps within social media posts. So I was just curious if either you or other colleagues of yours that you're aware of are using similar techniques for trying to look at that, because a lot of, you know, it's one thing if we have a clear event that's racist. There's this unconscious bias, which is a little bit harder to identify, and it seems like maybe some of these tools could be used for helping to identify patterns in the way people are talking about things that that would otherwise be hard to identify.
Absolutely. So to answer part of the question, I'm not aware of any studies that look at racism specifically. I would be surprised if there were not some out there. But the reason for my ignorance is that this is kind of our foray into communication. So a lot of that will happen in communication studies, media studies, and so on. So that will be the place to look for this. And I would be surprised if, you know, there was no research at all looking at that. To some extent, we're thinking of this as something that you know, transportation scholars and you know, urban planners and so on and so forth should be aware of, and that does not commonly appear in the resources that we will, you know, look for and read. But that it relates to what you said, so it's unconscious. Or, you know, it may not be. It may be propaganda, right? And you may well have a mix of propaganda and, you know, framing that is just that way because that's the way it's been framed for forever. What makes this very challenging and, in a way, eye-opening is that once that you are aware of the concept of framing and you start paying attention to the information that you perceive and see, seen from that lens, you start detecting all those things, right? It's expensive. Like I said, framing in a way is a cognitive shortcut. If we can save energy braining, we do that, right? So a frame gives you shortcuts to think about something with the least effort. So looking beyond the frame or even seeing the frame, right? So partly this is what it is. When you're looking at something that's in a frame, you may not even be aware of the frame. So seeing the frame takes effort. Seeing beyond the frame is even, it's even more demanding. But that is something that is crucial. That as a concept, I introduced this for the first time in my transport policy course 2 years ago, as I became interested in framing, because I think that when I ask my students about a policy, and they just sort of repeat the frames that they have been exposed to without realizing what they are, and once that they realize, oh, wait a second, and then they start looking at the frame and beyond the frame, they have these amazing realizations about who is telling the story, potentially what is their agenda, what are the implications for taking action or motivating action and so on. So I think that if it's not been done yet, I think that it will be fascinating to look at that in terms of racism, which again could be a mix of propaganda and unconscious bias, but also because it helps you understand why do cities work in certain ways. I mean, I'm interested in cities, and there was this report just a few weeks ago about an algorithm that was being used by the city of Los Angeles, I believe, for social housing, that consistently rejected brown people at higher rates than everyone else, right? And so the way that's reported, and even the way the algorithm works, it's just sort of embedding all that, right? So thinking of framing, I find it also helps me to think about my own efforts doing data analysis and modeling and so on and so forth, because it's what is the message, how effective is the message if it's presented in a certain way, right? So even purely in terms of being an effective communicator, I think that this idea is really, really important.
Can I ask a super quick one? So when you do the NLP, do you think, would you expect the results to change depending on the algorithm you use? Or would you consider them to be robust? I don't know this.
Yes. So for some of the techniques in natural language processing, there is no randomness. So for instance, the word frequencies, it's just counting words.
That's fine. Yes.
Right. But when doing, for instance, the topic analysis, that will have a random seed. And yes, so the concern there is that if I do it once, I get some results. But if I do it and my random seed change, it's going to give me something different. And if I do it, a bunch of times, that is going to be different every time. So we were aware of that. And, the concern is that that may happen. We don't really know if it does until we try, right? So we did check for robustness. If we did this 5 times, and every time we get completely disparate topics, no consensus at all. But we did this, I don't recall now if it was 50 or 100 times, to make sure that we got more or less the same thing. So yes, there will be some variations, but essentially the topics were, we didn't have huge disparities in what the topics were as we did this repeatedly.
Very good. Thank you.
If anyone else has questions, they're welcome to just speak out or raise your hand or put it in the chat, whatever you want.
Yes, there was something in the chat, I think. Let me see if, I don't know if, why is this topic important? Oh, okay. So why is it important? That's partly of what they're trying to communicate. So for the government, because it can potentially reduce the cost of healthcare, the cost of, loss in productivity due to crashes and so on and so forth. For parents and children, it may be, a safety issue, a health issue. For employers and Ontario citizens, for employers, it's a little bit more interesting. I'm not sure. Sort of, school boards are employers, right? So for school boards as that, but this is as it, all the documents were mostly about children traveling to school, not teachers and principals and staff going to school. So I'm not quite sure what, why it would be important to employers. But for governments, it has to do with, reducing the cost, the burden of, healthcare, to improve the local environment, to make places attractive for people with children to live, like, attracting people to a city like Hamilton. New York, everybody wants to go to New York, but Hamilton. So we need to have a message that says the best place to raise your children. Why? Because they can walk, they can cycle, they can go to school this healthy way, and so on. And then for parents and children, I think it's probably a lot to do with quality of life and health. So that was the question in the chat. Okay, not sure if there is another one. That was it. Yeah, great.
Okay, well, thank you. I guess we're out of time anyway. Thank you so much, Dr. Paez. This was a really fascinating talk. I really enjoyed it.
I'm really glad to hear that. Thank you,
Yeah,
Jackie.
we loved it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mauricio. And thank you, everyone. Wish you a happy Friday. And Mauricio, hopefully,
Sí,
hopefully I will see
esperamos.
you in España.
Sí, buena
Thank you,
Pascua.
everyone.
Chao, chao, grazie. Ciao,
Hasta
ciao.
luego, grazie.
Ciao.
Ciao, thank you.